or at least instability and challenges, were post-World War II Germany and Japan. Two nations that now are counted among two of the largest economies in the world, despite all that happened to them in the course of their prosecution of a war of their choosing. They have recovered. And it is often cited between those two nations, which are not awash with natural resources. One of the biggest factors is their work culture. And then when you apply that lesson to Trinidad and Tobago, the conversation will usually end somewhere around, I don't know if we could do that. We're not like that. That's not us. We're not like them. We don't have the work culture that perhaps Japan and Germany has. To be fair, not many countries do. However, to be or not to be. Because we're not talking about, well, we don't have this resource, and this is the difference. We don't have this geographic location. We don't have this quality that cannot be determined by us. We're talking about what do we want to be. Because underlying the question of to be or not to be, you have to meet one simple criteria. You have to have the ability. If you do not have the ability, then the implication choice presented to the subject will not exist. It is not up to you. And I would dare say that we in Trinidad and Tobago have proven time and time again, in many ways and in many facets of life, that we have the ability to compete on the world stage. So, we have the ability. And at the end of the day, perhaps now faced with challenge, adversity brings innovation and change. And towards the question to be or not to be, I will say, to push the conversation further, yeah, it seems as though that's not us, but why can't it be us? What's stopping us except ourselves? We need to determine, moving forward, what it is we want to be. Sean Michael Small here, this is Talking Point on WESN, and we want to be a platform to speak about the important events of the day, and of course, the weekend gone by. So, with no further preamble, let's kick off today's daily review. And I want to start where most people will not expect me to start. We're going to hold off on the economy stuff at quite this moment. We're going to start with the Minister of Youth Development and National Service, Foster Cummings. He is looking to sue the state as a private citizen, a civil case for the misuse of private information, breach of confidence, and breach of its constitutional right to privacy stemming from the leak of a secret special branch report in 2022. And that leads me to the question, because we're not talking about, oh, something to do about his family was leaked, something to do that has potentially no pertinence to us, the people of TNT, but rather a police report was leaked. And he's saying, no, my right to privacy trumps this. But he is a public person. And in other jurisdictions, to some extent, a public person only has so much right to privacy. It all depends to some extent on the details, and one could argue a politician wanting to say that a report by the police on them, do they have a right to privacy to say that it should not be leaked and that the police have to take legal responsibility if it is leaked? I mean, to some extent, we could even have the debate on should it be disclosed. Well, the fact of the matter is, or rather, not so much of a fact, the pertinent question is, has the report drawn a conclusion? Or was it preliminary and thus what it had to say potentially premature? Now, Senator Jayanti Lakshmi Ramdale, who to some extent, she is the person that brought the report, the leaked report, to the public on a political platform and was facing a lawsuit because of it, although I'm not entirely sure, I can't remember what happened there. But she's brought up the fact that the minister is seeking to clear his name, hence the lawsuit, but is the investigation ongoing? Is it finalized? To some extent, it's not as though investigations, all of them, there's a declaration and we end it here because we cannot continue or something like that. Cold cases aren't necessarily closed. They're only closed when, you know, it's solved. To what extent is this situation deemed to be much to do about nothing, or the police might be actually actively continuing? And the thing about it is, to what extent is it a lie? Is it slander? There are some significant ethical questions here, because Minister Cummings, his reputation to some extent is tarnished by a report, but he is technically not guilty of anything yet. But like I said, is it a lie? And more importantly, should he have an expectation of privacy over this? So, the reason why I wanted to start with today, because I do have a question of the day over this situation. And our laws of privacy a little bit, well, let's just say that there probably is a lot of cleaning up to do. Stuff around the SSA a few years back probably did not help. But should politicians have a right to privacy, especially as it pertains to any potential criminal acts? Should they have a right to privacy? Because we're not talking about, again, we're not talking about his financials, his private financials were leaked, where his children go to school, that's not what was leaked, where his wife works, that's not what was leaked. It was a special branch report from the police. So, on one hand, it might unfairly prejudice the public against him, tarnish his public reputation. On the other hand, maybe the public has a right to know. This is one of those things where I'm not saying what's right or wrong in this case. I actually want to hear from the viewers, because I do believe that, like I said, it brings up a lot of questions and it needs a significant, I believe, a thorough discussion and contemplation on what sort of precedent we should set to deal with cases like this, not just for this one. And therein lies where biases will undermine the principles. Biases will say those who are for Foster Cummings and or the PNM will want to be on his side of the issue, and those who are against Foster Cummings and or the PNM will want to be against him on this side of the issue, except the principle of the matter, the precedent set, will then have to be applied on everybody. And that's how we should look at it. Not what we want the effect of this to be, whether we like the minister or not, but rather as a society, what it is with regards to privacy, what should we, the public, have a right to know for the people who are public individuals. Now, let's move on to the next story. This is just a quick hit that I wanted to mention. I find it somewhat interesting. Apparently, part of the constitutional reform consultation included a session on June 8th in San Fernando, and MP Scotland brought up the fact that they are seriously considering a recommendation on whether or not we have to put the right well, there should be a right to a fair trial within a reasonable time frame. And I find that an interesting question. Because technically speaking, I would just like to point out, a lot of people say bring back, the death penalty. The death penalty is legally on the books. The problem is not the death penalty. The problem is we take too long. And it has been ruled that because if you take too long, you cannot leave someone on death row for more than, I think, 4 or 5 years, so then it's commuted to life. So ironically, with regard to the death penalty, indirectly, they have a right to a speedy trial or a trial, or rather, not so much a trial, but they have a right for the entire proceedings to then lead up to their execution once a guilty verdict and the penalty, the sentence of death is passed. They have a right for that to be done in a timely manner. Because if it's not, then they're not executed. That's the be-all and end-all of that. So a precedent to some extent, while not necessarily directly speaking to the question, does exist within our common law as a precedent, as a ruling. To some extent, I would argue that this should be almost self-evident that we should not have murder trials or the preliminaries of murder trials lasting for what? Over a decade? To what the capacity for miscarriages of justice just based off of the sheer fact that witnesses might not survive the wait. It's considerable and has probably been seen many times before. So I understand why it's not an automatic inclusion, because on a technical level, fixing the actual practical problems, as we discussed just this Friday with Fareed Ali, attorney at law, is not that simple. We could increase the capacity of the court system additionally, sequentially. But as he said, and as we've seen, the problem is growing exponentially. But I think this is a case where we're seeing not necessarily great vision and leadership and innovation and problem solving. We're seeing average, ordinary, an ordinary approach. We don't know how we're going to do a thing, so we can't promise the thing, even though one would argue the thing is not only self-evident, but critically needed. We just don't know how to do it, so we can't promise it. And to some extent, I can't necessarily fault the politicians for that. But therein lies the rub. The whole idea is you're supposed to be the best and the brightest, therefore worthy of consideration for leadership, therefore that's why you're there in the job. Of course, MP Scotland is not leadership of the administration, so it's not his responsibility, ultimately. And he would not want to commit the administration onto any path. He doesn't have the authority to do that. So I'm directing this more on his superiors in whatever capacity you determine or interpret that to be. All right, last story, and then we'll just take a quick break. Occupational Health and Safety Authority, they have filed a formal complaint against WASA for 6 breaches of the OSH Act. This is with regards to the incident that claimed the life of the WASA worker who was buried alive. And I think at the end of the day, to some extent, one could argue, are we surprised? This is just a symptom of a wider problem with regards to the management of our public entities, public utilities to some extent, and then WASA itself, which is said to not necessarily be in a healthy place operationally for a wide variety of reasons. I'm not going to get into it. But I think ultimately it highlights that, look, if we're not tight with our rules, similar to what happened with Nikwan's plant, similar to what happened with Paria, these things could happen in part when people are not held accountable. Now, fortunately, it's not as though entities like WASA could afford for these things to happen willy-nilly all the time and just brush it aside. But at the same time, this is the extreme example. What else goes wrong that we don't know about? Is the question, I guess, that should be asked. Because they are in the list of bad things that could happen with regards to WASA. Death is at the top of the list. But what about all the other things that come underneath? Including unreliability of service, interruption of service, poor maintenance that leads to frequent interruptions or lengthy interruptions of service. How many people have issues about not getting water for weeks at a time, months maybe? And then, of course, there's the racketeering allegations. Of course, the other thing is to what extent now is OSHA, they're just taking the low-hanging fruit, the obvious. This is not something that they could ignore. The EMA, OSHA, I do wonder at times, are they paper tigers for the most part? Are they forced to be selective? These are questions we have to ask. Every death is one too many. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into the economy. Stay tuned. This is Talking About a WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
We're back here and talking about a WSND content capital. Of course, ESP will be joining me a little bit later. But in the meantime, something has come out of the budget talks, mid-year review. We just had the IMF saying, woo, good things, yay. And then the minister said, see, IMF said things were good. Except, you know, this year, for this budget, this year, we're looking at maybe a $3 billion in revenue that we're not actually, you know, we planned for, we anticipated, we hoped for, we're not actually going to get. Tough 2-year period looms. Interesting, 2 years, at times they say 3 years. I'm not entirely sure why he's saying 2 years. Minister of Energy said, well, in 2020, let me just double check this here. 2027, we will return to the heights of natural gas production. We're still in 2024, so, you know, I think it's going to be 3 years. But anyway, back to the minister. He's saying, you know, things are going to be rough. We're going to have careful spending ahead. I am questioning. I already have a question. Former minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mariano Brown, he praised, actually, the Minister of Finance, Colin Burt, saying, you know, no one probably could have cut expenditure and control expenditure like the current Minister of Finance. Well, that's interesting. My question is, we're going to control expenditure, we're going to have careful spending ahead. In theory, we should already be doing that. At a time when not only do we have new taxes on the horizon, but certain subsidies, like the fuel subsidy, were more or less reduced. You mean to tell me that they were increasing the charges or the load that the population had to bear, and they didn't necessarily look to be careful with their spending as much as possible already? We have more expenditure we could cut. You mean to tell me when local government bodies, including PNM, it's just that the PNM ones are not going to publicly complain. The UNC ones will complain. The PNM ones will smile and nod and wave and say nothing to see here and grunt and deal with it. When they're not getting enough money, when the ministries aren't getting enough money, we still have expenditure that we could cut. Now, because of this, to some extent, understandably so, to some extent, the opposition leader has been reported to have saying that the country is bankrupt. That's what one headline says. And apparently she made the claim multiple times. I didn't bother to look at the Dog and Pony show, I will admit, because it's depressing. But then she went on to say that the government is targeting the people to make up for the revenue shortfall. They're looking to get the money from the people. I mean, anybody else, does anybody not think that the wrecking in Port of Spain is, well, you know, we want to get money? It's almost like if they kind of forgot about the complaints about some of the potential unethical practices done by some of those wreckers. But anyway, to some extent, what the opposition leader is saying does make sense with regards to the fact that the government were looking at the people to make up for the money that they don't have, right? Although, as my co-host Keaton Shah, host of AM Prime, always says, you can't tax a country into wealth. But property tax is on its way at a time where one could argue we're just barely at a reasonable balance point with regards to cost of living and the individual's capacity to carry on with their lives. Now, certain luxury goods being taxed, I get it, I understand, makes sense. It also, depending, where importation to retail society, so it helps control the foreign exchange. Although the amount of new cars I've seen on the road, whether foreign used or brand new, it would imply there's a lot of money to be had from the population. But I would argue that to some extent, you're squeezing the middle class and you're hurting the lower class. Meanwhile, the upper class will bear with it. Maybe some of them won't. Maybe. I mean, to what extent can their businesses continue to function when their employees' salaries ever so slightly continue to effectively be incapable of sustaining them? And then the employees have to tell the boss, I either need a raise or I need to move on. And then all of a sudden, my business plan, if I'm a businessman, blows up in my face. Because at the end of the day, we would like to think that AI could replace people, but the fact of the matter is that is usually wishful thinking and poor implementation, except for very niche and controlled situations. So I think her warning is very real, and in fact, to some extent, it's pretty obvious, right? Rates for electricity are on the table to be increased. Rates for water are potentially on the table to be increased. Like I said, we have the property tax. Who knows what else is going to be coming down the pipe? We just had the fuel subsidy. Well, not just, or not too long ago, had it reduced. What else is going to happen? I mean, with regards to electricity consumption, private businesses had to face fixed rates even if they shuttered their business, at least in Tobago. Hotels closed down, basically switched off their breakers, and still had to pay tens of thousands of dollars a month because of the systems that we have. Let's put it that way. But to say that the country is bankrupt, believe it or not, I understand where the Prime Minister is coming from. Because the Prime Minister is basically saying, no, the economy has not collapsed. we are not bankrupt, which is true. This is where his counterpart needs to be more careful. You can't go too far with the hyperbole, with the exaggeration, for the sake of politics, because you could potentially, I don't know, cause a panic. More importantly, one of the ways you misdiagnose a problem is saying it is at this severity, when in reality it's at this severity. And then, of course, now you overcompensate with the solution and you potentially waste resources doing so. And you give up a lot in terms of opportunity costs when we didn't necessarily have to go that far. One could argue, I'm speaking here in general and in principle, because the reality is, one could argue we do have to kind of go far to deal with some of the issues that we have. But I could appreciate what the Prime Minister is saying. In order to be responsible with the messaging, you could say it's bad, but to say we're bankrupt, and I think there's this thing in human nature where if we want to say how bad something is, we're going to go to the extreme. And that's why, you know, anything, at least at one point in time over the last couple of years, anything that could be construed as racism, no matter how small, you're instantly a Nazi. Or anything that has to do with people being killed is instantly genocide, even though the numbers are in the low tens of thousands as opposed to the millions. Anything that causes fear is terrorism, not necessarily understanding a mass shooter event and a terrorist attack is going to have two different responses, and if you apply the wrong one, you might actually not save as much people as you could have applying the correct one. And so on and so on. We're not bankrupt. We don't have to go so far to say we're bankrupt, because to say we're bankrupt immediately implies that the country, which most people would think a country is too big to fail. Countries are not supposed to fail. They can't fail under extreme circumstances. Are we there yet? Talking point, many people on this show have warned that we're going there. We're on the road to go there. We're slowly creeping there, but we're not there yet. Because the remedies for being there are too harsh. We don't want to have to bear them. That's the whole reason why you try to stop and prevent from getting to that point. So to say that we're bankrupt, I don't think it's a good idea. It's not responsible. She could have said, at this rate, it would not be long before we might have to consider the question, are we heading to bankruptcy? You might think it's semantics, but no, unfortunately, simple direct messaging goes more viral. Or, to put it a different way, are slogans that get more circulation. Even before the internet, it essentially went viral a lot more easily. It got spread around. It got distributed more easily. And that's one of the reasons why politicians like to use terms that people will understand easily, even though they might overblow the situation. But that's, like I said, not necessarily the responsible thing to do. It's the easy thing to do, and it oversimplifies the problem, because the problem is not that we're bankrupt. The problem is we do have a deficit, and we have to treat with that. Saying that we're bankrupt, that's a whole next kettle of fish. But the interesting thing is, I don't know if a government could file for the equivalent of Chapter 11 bankruptcy in order to stave off its debtors. But with that said, I do think this kind of goes against the whole, oh, look at the growth that we're seeing that the IMF is pointing out. Whoop-de-doo. We're growing so much that our revenue shrank by around the same amount that the Auditor General is saying may or may not exist. Again, as Karen pointed out, maybe it's just a happy coincidence, but still, it's not one that we should necessarily dismiss out of hand either. And like I said, the Minister of Energy said, well, 2027, we will get to the energy heights. First of all, I believe that when I see it. Second of all, good luck, we have to get there first. And ironically, this could be the economic situation similar to what the Democrats are going through that could sink the administration. But for the most part, some of the seniors are old enough to retire anyway. And this is one of the problems with politics. Politicians don't care about the country, they care about the country for the length of their term. Because if anything goes wrong after their term, that's a them problem. That's not a me problem. And speaking about politicians, so I'm questioning the opposition leader. Now, the thing about it is, according to a NACTA poll, the UNC's membership is looking at this interim election with some concern, apparently. Because, first of all, they, according to the poll, so to what extent it's going to be accurate, polls are not always accurate, right? Even if we take into the margin of error into account, it's not always accurate. But with that said, according to this poll, members are dissatisfied with the performance of the national executive, the incumbents. And they're also concerned about the fairness of the internal elections that's coming up at the end of this week. And ironically, Dr. Winford James has pointed the fact that Dr. Keith Rowley has apparently endorsed Kamala Persad-Bissessar as political leader of the UNC. And it's a strategic move. Now, the question is, I think that Dr. Keith Rowley is basically, it's a win-win for him, right? It potentially makes people look at Kamala slight. It potentially prevents the UNC from changing. And if it doesn't change, well, look at that. He endorsed the winning candidate. Isn't he smart? He knew it all along. But it just goes to, and I was speaking to someone about this over the weekend, whether we like it or not, the PNM does have an internal structure that goes down to the roots, to the base of the population, which, while it does not perfectly prevent bacchanal and internal strife from getting out of hand, it does allow the party to function and organize itself in a much more efficient manner than its competition. Not saying that it is efficient, it might still be inefficient, but it's more efficient than its competition. Meanwhile, one has to ask, does the MP of Miaro, does he have enough momentum and enough sway to change to some extent the direction of the UNC? That's basically, arguably, what he is, at least on the surface, trying to do. And by doing so, potentially cause significant effect on the results of this upcoming general election, which will be within a year. And I could see, to an extent, where the Prime Minister does not necessarily want to see that happening. So again, it's a win-win for him. I guess for the most part, it's not so much that he wants a certain opposing candidate on the other side of the aisle, but rather he just wants a weaker opposing party. And this situation runs that risk. But I do empathize with the membership of the UNC. This is not the first time allegations about the fairness of the internal elections have come up. To be fair, the fairness of any internal political election has been an issue, one could argue, within the country. But the two oldest parties, the PNM and the UNC, they of course have more baggage. And more importantly, the PNM could point to the fact that, look, at the end of the day, we win elections. We win general elections, right? Population ain't vote us out yet. UNC, on the other hand, the members are looking at the fact that you lost general elections. Why are you still here? On the surface, that's not a winning formula. It's usually not a winning formula around the world. But Netanyahu got voted back in Israel. So who knows? This is 2024. Politics and the standards and convention of politics within Western democracies are being thrown out the window faster than I could blink my eyes ever since the world went crazy, and that happened before COVID. And now, to what extent, ironically, we were slightly insulated from that. We had our own problems, but now, to what extent are we going to see, if not the same thing, similar parallel issues happening in our democracy here in TNT? It does not take that much for things to go so downhill that democracy dies in thunderous applause. And ironically, to call back to the topic before, as the economy potentially gets worse and worse, and maybe in 2027, things will get back to normal temporarily because the gas doesn't last forever. But as the economy gets worse and worse and crime gets worse and worse, the calls of the population for more serious actions to be taken can potentially lead to, because we've asked this before, and at the time people weren't necessarily willing, but it can lead to the suspensions of individual rights and freedoms. And then, depending on how far we go down that train and who we entrust that to, we might not see those rights and freedoms return. That is, while not a common story, it's not necessarily an impossible or rare story. Let's take a break. When we come back, we should have the media ambassador. Stay tuned. This is Talking One at WSN. Sean Michael Small, we will be right back now.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there next to Steph. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. I mean, and Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
It is, now you don't need to register nothing, you don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and, I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available. The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Chaguanas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop, 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's. WESN, 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook. Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we cannot stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI. Worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. Sean Michael Small here, joined by acting ASP Ashraf Ali, TTPS Media Ambassador. Once again, good morning, sir.
Good morning,
Good
Sean.
to have you to start off the week.
Yes, it's good to be here again.
And we're talking about a subject that I believe we might have hit upon around this time last year. It's something that my co-host tends to see more than I do, because when you travel significantly, you know, when your daily commute is large enough, you would see examples of this, or at least you used to,
Yeah.
with regards to child begging, but then there might also be further concerns that you might have over child labor.
Yeah, so, and you know, Wednesday is, in fact, Wednesday the 12th is National Day Against Child Labor, right? And we might believe in Trinidad and Tobago we don't have the issue of child labor as how it is portrayed in other countries.
Yes.
Or I should say, how significant is it in other countries because of other different economic circumstances of individuals where they live, right? Where child labor is part of the whole lifestyle, right? Unfortunately, I should say that.
Yes.
Right? And
You have children to help with
yeah,
your...
so you're not...
that's historical.
Yes, and it's not to say that you're condoning it in any particular way, but I mean, at the end of the day, you know, the UN Convention also said that the child has rights and privileges just like everybody else, right? And as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, they have some enshrined rights in that they have rights, and one of the rights is that they must the right to be a child.
Right.
Right. And our laws down here, a child is considered under the age of 18. However, our labor laws states that at the age of 16, you can work from 16 to 18. You can
full-time or part-time?
Full-time, part-time. You can be employed from the age of 16.
I remember when I was in secondary school, one of the people in my year kind of disappeared from school, and nobody knew where he was. Eventually, the school realized the family didn't know that he wasn't coming to school. He was working, and they had to convince him to do CXC O-levels, right? To not just like abort his education at the 11th hour. Although one could argue that, I don't know if he was prepared enough because of whatever circumstances.
Yeah.
But it left a difficult situation.
So there are situations that we have children, and when I say the word children, for the purpose of this conversation, I'm saying 16 and under, right?
Yeah.
16 and under, because it's illegal to be employed at the anybody to employ any child under the age of 16, right?
Well, now, when you say employed, because at least in other countries, ironically, they would. I don't know what the laws would be, but traditionally, you know, teenagers would work for certain hours, right, or certain number of hours per week. They will have jobs, whether it's a paper route, fast food work, whatever, to earn some kind of part-time money.
Good, but in Trinidad and Tobago, under the age of 18, you are considered a child. The labor law states 16 and above is the minimum age to be employed. I'm not talking legally employed.
Right.
So at the age of 16 and beyond, you are now able to work. That's why you see on many of the private institutions, we have persons doing part-time job, but they are being paid a salary.
Yes.
So it is legal. So it is not hidden. It's across the board. You know who you know you carry your child to certain places to get a little experience in the work environment, earn a little monies to go to school. You know, get accustomed to the work environment.
Have some spending money.
But
get some experience.
Yes, but they are all 16 and above. Legally, that's a legal requirement. But however, we do have where we continue to have it's a balancing act when it comes to that. How you balance the social aspect of it, how you balance the legal aspect of it. If you're going from a rigid perspective of enforcement of the law,
right,
it may cause more harm than good.
Because I was about to ask, is it that some situations are too subjective? Because I know, like, say you have a small family business and you bring the child along. Now, he's not really working, right? But he's working, but he's kind of helping out.
So in that aspect, where there are a number of businesses actually, even in the market environment, persons in the market would go with the family and assist in selling. They're not working per se.
Yeah.
Right? But if we go strict to the law, it constitutes work.
In fact, it's work without compensation, even worse.
Yes, work without compensation. But there's an argument behind in that is that that's my family business and I'm assisting with respect to that.
But outside of the obvious example of, because Keaton has seen this, I think I've seen this very, very few and far between around the Port of Spain area, right? Say it's in parts of the highway. You would have the adults kind of sending the child to beg. They're not so this is not the child is helping me work. This is, they're doing the work while I wait because I'm exploiting the children. Please say, can I get some money?
And so under the Children Act, Section 5, it specifically speaks to begging on the streets. And anyone who uses a child to assist or put that child, because you're putting the child's life in danger, be on the streets to beg. So it is an offense, and you can be fined $3,000 and imprisonment for 6 months. However, like I said, there is in fact, anyone who sees that could report the parent, and an investigation will be dealt with done in the context of the Child Protection Unit because of the fact that you're breaching the Children Act. But then, historically, we have seen this thing happening over and over. There's a balancing act and a social responsibility for the state, from the state perspective as well as the law. How do we balance that? Because if that is the individual's only means of getting or survival, are we taking it away from them to beg? So there's a lot of, it is not as simple as saying, arrest the individual, charge them.
Because then there's the other side of it. I know online one of the things abroad, parentification of minors. So, okay, we go the reverse. You can work, we could work. But housework, you, 12-year-old, you're the oldest, you need to mind your siblings because we have to work 2 jobs, right? But then now that 12-year-old, essentially, the principle or the practical result is they're not allowed to be a child, they have to be a parent. And of course, I guess we've also kind of covered this when we have holiday period, who is supervising children in the house while the parents are away, right? There's also that aspect to be considered. But also to that point of the child not being allowed to be a child. But the flip side is now how easy it is to tell a family, well, y'all are barely meeting ends meet, working 2 low-income jobs each, or probably very often it's a single parent.
So we have come from what we call house chores, helping around the home, to the concept of work.
Yeah.
Because sometimes some persons may grow up and understand that it's house chores.
Yeah.
Now, in the current environment, it is no longer considered house chores. It's part of your life, your environment now, where parents are working, children have to take care of the younger ones or take care of their own selves, as opposed to before it was house chores. Because of the dynamics of where we are, how society has become. We have not addressed those things but the law is simply there. It is in fact part of it, right? So we have to be very cautious and understand that we just cannot say that you are allowing the child just doing work home. It is in my house, that is house chores, I don't see an issue with it, or doing things that within the family, that benefits the family whole, and not understanding the child does not have an opportunity to be a child.
Right.
Because the child has responsibilities that adults should have, and that child is not forced to have that responsibility as an adult.
Which could impact their future as an adult.
As an adult.
And families do need to be aware that, look, depending, it's not that anyone wants to do this, but at some point things will get so bad that authorities will be forced to intervene, and that could mean the removal of the children from the home.
We don't have a big issue of child labor. What we have is sometimes issues as it relates to abuse, the abuse side of it, right? Where we have neglect and sexual abuse and the other abuses. That is another conversation as
one
this.
could argue part of abuse could be that forced essential,
But
whether it's for the business or for the household work.
That becomes abuse, because if you are forcing a child to do chores do work under the umbrella of assisting the family or working for the family business, it is in fact an abuse.
Well, I mean, I think the amount of work is part of what should be considered.
It's questionable at the same time.
If the child is there for 8 hours a day without rest and having to be the only customer front-facing or the only person doing a specific core job function.
But we even have the issue that is not as prominent as on other places, where it can also be argued that 16 years and over, even though it's legal, should a 16-year-old be have to go to work at 16 years when under the age of 18 is because that 16-year-old child, as the case may be, is in fact working, and that work is assisting in maintaining a household.
We do have some interesting practical dynamics with regards to you could have your O-levels or whatever the modern equivalent is at 16. That is more or less the end of the education that you have to undertake. So then what you're going to do, you're going to tell 16-year-olds that don't have any prospects for further education, well, you can't work, and figure it out.
So that's why I am saying that we can't be as rigid as we like.
But then, I hate to say this, but there might be cases where, look, sometimes it's not that the family wants to be in a situation, they were forced into it. Say it's a single parent situation, and then the single parent is overworked, gets injured, and now cannot earn the amount of income that they need to support the family. And then potentially, the eldest child is looking at a situation where I could go to sixth form, or even before he does O-levels, somebody needs to earn some money, otherwise, nobody's eating under this roof. And we don't want to see the kids removed from the parents and have to go into the system, because the system is never, no matter how nice the system is never the first option.
There was always a balancing, but you have to be able to balance it with not on the negative side, where the child is being abused to the extent that or forced to, with all the rights and privileges, not being a child. The more prominent what we have, and we have seen it over the years, is the one we talked about, begging, where we have a lot of persons who on the streets with their children, who are holding their children in their hands, and actually sometimes you see children, toddlers, right, and they are begging, and they use the children as a means of empathy.
Yes.
We must empathize with them, and the emotional, dwell on the emotions of individuals, because I want to mind my child, and I want to have to mind my child, and need to get X, Y, and Z. And the children is there. The children is exposed to the elements on a daily basis coming, and begging becomes your day job, because every single day that you are begging. Now, these are strict in terms of the law. This is a clear-cut case of those individuals can be placed under can be prosecuted and charged for allowing the children to beg. So that's a clear-cut case, but then we have the aspect where we have number of immigrants coming in the country.
Yes, I mean, you might actually face the practical reality of there are too many children to have to be then taken in.
And they are on the streets.
And too many people to arrest.
Yes, so like I said, this is not I want to be very cautious and say it is against the law, but the enforcement of it from the perspective of strict law can cause more problem for the society when it comes to the socioeconomic issues that we may face with dealing with these circumstances, because these circumstances, persons in those situations may not be able to help their current circumstance.
And I think this, to close, one of the things that I started to think about is this is where, the loss of the village, I think, we kind of feel it the most, because the village didn't just help raise the child, the village also took care of its own for the most part. Now, granted, I could understand in 2024, not a lot of people in the village could afford to help out a lot of the people in the village. I get that, but at the same time, to some extent, those types of solutions probably are the ones that society could most effectively implement now. To say that the police are going to just arrest everybody that does it, that has a lot of complex implications and consequences. I don't know if the rest of us are ready to witness. We may not, because to some extent, if it exceeds what our capacity, we will actually have to bear some of those consequences ourselves.
Yeah. But holistically, I just want to make sure that what I reinforce that in the fact that Wednesday is the against the International Day Against Child Labor, that persons review whether or not their current situation and the use of their children constitutes child labor. Yeah. I'm not saying that I could understand your circumstance, and your circumstance might it could be changed because of your situation, but we need to be cognizant that a child needs to be a child, and child has to be a child, and a child should not be placed to be an adult before the child turns 18, right? And this is sometimes we have some challenges with it. People believe that because the child reached the age of 16, or the child appears to be
a man,
an adult, behaving, after 13, 14, they're big, they can handle.
They act big, so they should be big.
They need to bring some money in the house, right? Yeah. Bring in money and help finance or take care of this sister, take care of the children, take care of their siblings. But at the end of the day, there are risk factors associated with that, and we need to look at ourselves holistically from that perspective.
I think one of the litmus tests for people out there, if the child's money is being taken by the parents, then that's not to the benefit of the child.
No, it is not.
Right? If the child is working and then the parents allow the child to keep the money, then one could argue, all right, that's a part-time job, whatever.
You're building child a sense of responsibility of earning something, but when the child brings home the paycheck, all paycheck goes to you, then that...
Because if the child is keeping the money, the implication is the child has a right to say, well, I don't want to work as much, or I don't want to work anymore, because I will deal with not having the source of income that I was generating.
And those are subtle things that happen within the home that you and I may or may not know about because it's within the home circle.
But I think that's the other thing. You have to ask yourself, how much work are they doing for the house or for the family business and not being a child? Because, listen, my family, to some extent, we look at the need for recreation, right, in our business. And that's for the employees. Children need recreation too, because if they're going to school and then they're working, to some extent their psyche is not going to hold up. And the strain of that, something is going to suffer. You need to have a time to yourself to revitalize and reflect. And then, of course, the amount of homework kids have, I don't even know where parents find the time to make them work. That's the other thing.
That's another
all right.
conversation.
Let's take a break, folks. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines. Of course, you could have your say over anything that happened over the weekend. Stay tuned. This is WSN Show. Michael Small, Ashraf Ali, Talking Point. We'll be right back after this.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. And I just want to get this in before I ask the question of the day. Ashraf, do you know Kitchener Street, they now did road works to fix a problem with like a hole at the turn into Kitchener Street from Colville. I just would like to point out that we had, about 5 to 6 months or 4 months of the driest or a drier than dry season and normal. And they decided to do that work at the start of the rainy season when we just happened to have a tropical wave come on the weekend, and the concrete, I guess, is not set yet, or nobody came out to remove the barricades to open the road. It's just one of those things where Trinidad's not a real place. We'll wait for the entire dry season to end, and then we're going to put concrete down on the roadway and hope that it dries over the weekend.
Very interesting, very interesting.
Now, with that said, I do have a question of the day. Bringing it back. Don't know if you're going to have the bumper to play for you. We have brought it back from necrosis, folks. Now, the question I mentioned earlier, should politicians have a right to privacy? Particularly with regards to any potential criminal acts, because it's not as though Foster Cummins is complaining, hey, pictures of my family's birthday party, was revealed on the internet. We're talking about something that is not a conviction, that is not a charge, but it is a police report. I don't actually have a strong opinion either way. But we have a first caller from Diego Martin. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
I will answer your questions like this. If you are in the public office and you're being paid by my taxpayer money, I want to get as much information on you so I could determine if you are honest, if you have integrity. I want to know who your friends are. I want to know who your family friends are. That will give me an idea to determine how honest a politician you are. But my first question to the Honorable Senior Superintendent there. Sir, there is a viral on the news all over the media where a lady, I don't know if she is related to jump your fence and deal with them, but she had threatened to do some physical damage to police in Chaguanas police station. And the other thing she has identified, a potential sergeant in that Chaguanas police station who possibly is misbehaving in public office with alleged serious crime. Now, if I was a policeman, both of them have to be coming forward and we have to investigate. So that is a question for you. The second question is to the host. And I want to bring in the AG on frivolous law action against the state. How can something be frivolous and you have to pay out $6 million? That means you lose the case. So any case that is brought against you not frivolous is because you did something.
Are you talking about the payment to the lawyer?
Yeah.
The thing is, depending on the matter, the lawyer's fees might be $6 million and we could have won. We could have won, not gotten the other side to pay court fees, and we just have to pay $6 million. That's the cost of winning.
Right. But that's right. So it can't be frivolous. If there's a judgment against
fair enough.
It can be. And the other one is against the potential speaker, where a member of parliament apparently maligned an activist. And it is apparently what the MP for North-South of Trinidad said is $14 million in litigation. And apparently the cases, he was not part of the cases, but the cases were settled, and apparently the fees paid by the government was much more than the settled fees against the clients of the sentencing. And all he was doing is asking for transparency. And I'm going to touch a couple of dots. When we elevated a lot of junior counsel to senior counsel, was that the hidden agenda? To pay lawyers hefty fee. I'll go on. Have a nice morning.
That's an interesting question, caller. I'll just say this with regards to the last point, because we don't have a caller waiting. I think what is allowed to be said in Parliament needs to be a bit more tightly restricted because it's protected, right? I'm not saying that in this case that it should not have been allowed to be said, or that, but the question now, he needs to defend himself in Parliament because it's protected. He can't challenge it in courts.
The thing about it.
And Gary Griffith successfully preempted statements in Parliament, right?
I think across the board, we have to be very cautious as how we disseminate information, whether it is factual or otherwise, because it has implications not only immediate, but it may have some long-term implications on an individual. So once you're within the public space in terms of public officers, and it goes back to even with law enforcement officers at the same time, because the argument mentioned the caller also talking about the issue in Shagwana's police station. There are allegations, but we just can't use the word allegations just so if there's an investigation taking place, just make comments about it without any factual information about it. So it is in fact a dangerous situation.
That's why the situation with the Minister of Youth Development, it's not so clear-cut, right? Because he's not been accused or charged of anything. We got a report, like that's in a sufficient enough gray area where I'm not gonna say I'm for or against his position. We have Faisal first and San Fernando. Faisal, good morning, you're on here.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Morning.
Senior Soup, I want to touch on the sedition issue. Firstly, and I would have brought it to your attention previously on this program, where a lady were inciting people to jump through a certain ethnic race fence and invade their homes. To me, in my mind, that is a seditious act. You're inciting that. And I was waiting for you to report on it because I heard you said you were going to investigate and follow up. There's another one that is making the rounds by the same person with a blatant attack on the leader of the opposition with racist overtones and what have you. So I would like you to use your office and do some investigation because you keep talking about it and nothing seems to be coming out. And these people go about doing the things of their own free will. The other thing I want to touch on is
quickly
taking at this Christmas fella, Chalabanti, on the police store. Do you think that was prudent? I know we have a lot of officers in the service who could have probably leaked information that there was going to be a tour, and they could have come under a barrage of gunfire thinking that this man was going to expose the nest. So I think that wasn't wise at all. That's just my opinion. The other one is the labor law. There's a gray area within the age of 14 to 16. And I noticed that, it is not being spoken about where children are allowed to work, especially I've seen in Trinidad and Tobago where a lot of kids are taken on stage where you pay an entrance fee and they perform. You know, I don't know what that constitutes.
They pay an entrance fee and they what?
But you have people at shows, at public shows, chutney and what have you,
right?
Calypsos.
Or performing.
Yes, and performing, and the parents are collecting fees at the door because most of the time they are promoters of the show.
All right, Cole, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I do have San Fernando waiting, so I'll have to end it there. That is somewhat of a grade. That's very subjective. Because to enforce it, you're going to cut out people who are also not doing the wrong thing in a similar circumstance. But I'll let Ashraf respond to that. We have San Fernando still waiting. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Yeah.
Morning, sir.
Apparently, you take on the role of the Director of Public Prosecution this morning. Yes, see, and I want to ask the question deliberately. And especially in light of that last comment about Christmas list. Is it that the DPP was the one to recommend the charges to the police to charge that gentleman? I know you'll answer it after. No. With respect to what you were talking about this morning with the labor laws, I think in that situation, discretion has to operate. A lot of discretion, because there are two calypsos: poverty is hell, and sufferers, Stalin and what you call him, and Shadow. And it speaks to the situation that you're seeing with these children and the parents, how they are being used on the street. And I understand the situation where you arrest the parents, who's going to take care of the children? Children going to stay on the street? Do we have enough space? The Children's Authority have enough room to put them into institutions? And that question is no, we don't. With respect to children working under the age, let me say this, I worked in my great-uncle's woodworking shop. My great-uncle, my family had a understanding. Once you reach primary school age, once you pass standard 1, when the holiday time came, you worked in that shop. So we had cousins as young as 7, going up to 14, 15. So it was a teaching environment, because when you go there at 7 years old, you don't know nothing. But what you learn is discipline. You understand work ethic. Whether it is you have to just move sawdust from A to B, or put these little wood from A to, and eventually, as you get older, and your uncle saw our great uncle saw the progress, we got things to do, like we started to help glue some stuff. You could not operate a machine until you were around 12. You will see it all the time, but that is when you would get a chance to sand something, the easy things before you go into the difficult things with the saws and stuff. And it built character. So with respect to children working in family environments, I think the law needs to look at that, because it can't be straight across the board. It can't be straight across the board. I am certain that if Sean had a son that was 12, 13 now, Sean would have to put him in the enterprise. We know what we're talking about, Sean. And have him gain some skills.
Well,
and have him gain some work ethic. So I think there needs to be a balance with respect to the law. It's not just law, but there is some social aspect. And the fact that what I'm seeing in SPLE is that in South here, there are a lot of immigrant children that are just begging. They're in front of the banks. Nobody's doing anything about it. I don't know if the banks haven't called the authorities. They are there especially on a weekend. On Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Those are the days that they bring the children out. And it is so heartbreaking, because some of them, you don't know. You don't know if it is that they're just bringing the children out to just hustle on their behalf, and then they go and party after the night. You don't know. So I would just hope that it is looked at in a more holistic way. Have a good day, gentlemen.
Caller, before you go,
yes, Sean,
my question, do public officials have an expectation, should they have the right to privacy?
No. Straight up, no. And let me say why. In the U.S., remember, they have, like, for instance, when you want to be a judge, or you have to go in front of Congress, and they ask you everything that they could find out about you, they question you.
That is true.
And so there should be no expectation of privacy once you're interfering with the public pulse, or you're handling the public pulse. Have a good day.
I mean, cabinet appointments, they get that level of scrutiny. Obviously not all your friends. Bob that works down the road, you know, when you were a child, and maybe he gave you some free sodas, is not going to constitute. Oh, that's a financier.
I think it's very controversial, that topic, because once you go into public life,
yes,
the mere fact that you're in public life, it means that you bring your life into the public scrutiny.
Basically, yes.
Everything, every action, good, bad, or indifferent, you take, you are subjected to be scrutinized.
To some extent, you and I,
right?
Essentially,
yes.
Just off of this show, we face a different level of scrutiny. It might not be as much as a politician, but we have to accept that. Otherwise, we need to not do this.
So true. So yes, but then there's also the other aspect of it, is that how much should be shared and what should be shared or make public. And that, I think that is a bigger question as to whether or not public life, because I believe everybody understands once you're in public life, your life is now part of the public forum.
Basically, especially when you're a politician, an elected official.
Yes.
And I think one of the unfortunate things for the Minister of Youth Development is, Foster Cummings, he has to understand that, look, I get it. To some extent, if the report is false, the police should say so. Outside of that, I don't know to what extent the commissioner has the responsibility to clear him, because I don't know where that investigation, at what point it has taken place.
And I think this is where investigations, how investigations are done, and the follow-ups of investigations. So once an investigation has commenced, if during the course of the investigation there is not sufficient evidence to lay a charge, or there is no evidence to support the allegations made, then the case is closed. There's no evidence to go forward.
Right.
I do not know if it's going to become a precedent, or if it's going to be a precedent where you want to set that at the expiration of every single investigation that involves somebody in a public space, or the average citizen, whether or not that person, the agency that doing the investigation, is now going to have to give an explanation why we couldn't go forward, or is it that we have no more evidence to go forward? That may bring out much more issues to answer, as opposed to just saying the matter is finished.
I mean, ironically, if the matter is finished, it does make it simpler for the whole thing to become, you know, aired out in the public.
Even if the matter is finished,
if
the matter is closed, there are still persons who will ask why the matter was closed.
That is true.
Or make allegations as the matter was not dealt with in a particular manner. Well, so there's a lot of areas still.
Consideration. Perhaps it's really two issues, because one, there was a leak. I don't know what the nature of the leak was. One could argue if it's an active investigation, or at least active at that time. That might be against the rules. Now, the flip side to that is, and I think there is room for the leaker, or the nature of the leak, that could be prosecuted under the law. But that doesn't mean that the information now exposed to the public, once it's not false, you know, I don't think the person in question potentially might not have the right to say, you know, my information should not be, well, no. The issue was a police investigation was potentially interfered with, right?
Yes.
That's that issue. And how the information is gathered could still be illegal. But depending, once the information is out there, and I could see a world where we get the information, the public has a right now that we have it to use it, but the leaker, and this is one of the things with whistleblowers, to some extent, part of the bravery to be a whistleblower is you're kind of breaking the law sometimes to blow the whistle. Not all the time.
Yes, yes.
And whistleblower protection, I don't believe, should also include, well, you are safe from your breaking the law. You're safe from persecution, right? You're safe from reprisals. You should be protected from that. But part of it is, look, I'm going to blow the whistle by breaking the law. I should be ready to face those consequences, right, on principle. Yeah. So, again, I'm not saying that the minister is right or wrong for doing what he's doing. You know, I'm just saying this is a big issue, I think, that we might not think it's big and it could be swept under the rug. With that said, I believe the police said that the tour with Christmas list did not actually happen.
No, it did not. It did not happen. That was just, and like I said, that's information or misinformation being fed again.
Right.
To create another narrative, right? And just to answer the caller with respect to the Sedition Act, right. There are a lot of things that we say or we believe that we say that can be constituted as causing an incitement of anybody or a group of individuals. Yeah. The Sedition Act, the way it has been, the way it is, it's very subjective in its certain actions and how it is viewed. The information was sent. There was a file compiled based on everything. It was sent to the DPP.
So these things are considered?
These are considered. And based on all of that, there was consideration on how to approach this very critical investigation and public investigation, public interest investigation.
I do have a question, though. Not to potentially open up a can of worms, but the DPP, it's not up to him. Is it up to him whether charges are laid? Or he advises?
There is in fact, he is the advisor to certain offenses, right, such as murder and all those offenses. Sedition is one of those, right, those offenses. He would have, information would have presented to him. They would have had a discussion, right? And at the end of the day, there was a decision to proceed in a particular manner.
The reason why I say so is it's not necessarily apparent if he is responsible for determining each and every charge of sedition. No. It could be him, it might not be him. I don't want to say that it's not him.
No, what I'm saying, under the Act,
yes,
in order for law enforcement to prefer the charges, there would have been evidence gathered. Yeah. There would have been. I'm not part of the investigation, so I'm saying. This is how the matters of this nature follow. Right? Yes. Yeah. Evidence would have been gathered, presented to the DPP. Right. Discussions would have taken place, and advice would have been given based on evidence that was gathered.
Right.
The evidence will now be coming out in the court. We have to sit, just like everybody else. The police officers who's not in the investigation have to be. We are not going to make any judgment or anything at all because we cannot, our professional capacity. We are too interested also to understand this case, because that is also a test case for us, because there's a lot of things that will help us going forward in accordance with the gang legislation and everything else. Right. How we could proceed, precedents for us. So it is. So we will sit and wait and see how it transpires, because like some of the callers, persons make statements. Some of those statements may or may not fall within that category. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful how we make statements.
Now, with that said, folks, I don't want to risk implying things that I don't intend, so I will not continue my line of questioning on this topic. Just, as an example of maybe some of the things that you're saying with regards to when you're speaking in the public and meaning.
It even falls into the category of when we have events, when an entertainer is on his stage. When an entertainer is on each stage, he has to be very cautious in how he incites the crowd.
So what you're saying is, if NWA was invited to come here, they're not going to do that famous song that got them arrested in Detroit?
No, they can't. because the furor of that and the activity, the environment, you have to be careful, because what you say at that point in time can create a different conversation. So it's all about that.
Folks, those who know the song will know it's one of the major scenes in the movie of this story that came out within the last couple of years. With that said, we have to close the shows there. Thanks to all the callers who called in. Thanks, of course, to ASPLE for joining me once again. The sedition topic, I think, is one of those where now it's getting a heavy light shone on it, given this most unexpected test case.
I think when you look at several of the laws that exist in our books, if we have not been able to explore the avenues with the law, we tend to go one side or tend to put our opinions within it.
Yeah.
Just remember, and I always say that persons need to be very cautious. I'm not a legal luminary, right? Interpretation of laws are in fact part of the law. So there are different sides, and both sides can argue because they interpret the laws differently, because that is how the laws were written, based on interpretation and based on evidence that bring forth. So that is why we have matters go before the courts to be argued, because you have both sides can argue the law.
I think a lot of people might not all understand that not everything about a court matter is black or white. It's predetermined, just whatever the evidence is.
Yes.
You know, there are things that, you know, that's why we have common law. Law is decided in the courts, whether we like it or not. So that's interesting, yes, because I did say there are a lot of things that I would like to see before the courts. Of course, the Auditor General situation notwithstanding. I want to see how I go to the Privy Council personally. Don't know if we're ready to divorce ourselves from the Privy Council, despite the fact that they are kicking and screaming, telling us to get out. We're gumming up their own courts like we do our own. With that said, we end the show there today, folks. Make it a good day, as my co-host always says. Remember your allegiance to the Republic. Stay safe. We will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
WESN